Hey team, welcome back to another Young Bucks podcast on Switch TV. I'm here today with Matt Billington and Grace. So Grace, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me. My name's Grace Stratton. I'm 20. I co-founded a business called All Is For All, which is a social change agency working in accessibility. We work across multiple different projects and pillars. Aside from that, I am a law student. I go to AUT University and I live in Auckland. Oh, and I also use a wheelchair.
Just missing out.
Key
Important part of that conversation.
Key. Yeah.
Easy. So I've known
Easy.
Grace. I've known Grace for a while, for a couple of years now. We met probably 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, we were still in schools.
We
We
were
were
still
last year high school, so
Yeah,
a few
so
years
it must have been
back
about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to start. I'm, just for the listeners that probably don't know as much about you as I do. Keen to hear a little bit more about your growing up, your childhood, what that was like. Obviously, you mentioned you're in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So we're kind of keen to talk a little bit more about
Start
that and
there,
kind of your journey through that. And we'll let you take it away with a couple of stories maybe, or
Cool.
kind of how your childhood was, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone's journey using wheelchair is different. My experiences as a child are basically shaped around wheelchair use because I have a thing called cerebral palsy, and I've had that since I was diagnosed at the age of 1. Cerebral palsy is essentially a brain injury. So if you can envisage, when you go to walk, your brain sends a message to your legs and it tells the muscles that are necessary to walk, to move and to operate so that you can walk. But in my brain, those messages get lost and they go to different places. And so as a result of that, I can't walk in a traditional way. But I sometimes will use a frame to walk, but I primarily use a wheelchair. So I've always used a chair, always navigated spaces as a disabled person. So most of my life experiences, if not all of them, have been influenced by using a wheelchair. And so they've been different because of that. You know, when you would go to school and you would participate in PE, you could just do it as a normal, the normal way. But I had to figure out different ways. When you pick up your bag to go home, you could do it in the normal way. I couldn't just pick my bag up and leave. So every single kind of experience that a child has, I've probably had to have the same experience, but the way I navigated that experience has been different. But I think that that's given me a lot of positive outcomes. Working in business now, I'm really swift to iterate because I've always had to think differently. So, it can be challenging to always have to do things in a different way, but it can also be like a really big opportunity for growth and development. So I've always kind of erred on the side of thinking of it that way.
How did that, I guess, touching kind of something we talked about a little bit about last week around the mental health piece, how did that shape you as growing up, going through school, going through, social settings as a young person, but confined to a wheelchair? How did that shape you, and how did that grow you into the person you are today? And
Cool. Well, I'm just going to correct you. I'm not
Good.
I'm not confined.
Not confined, yes.
I'm not confined. I use a wheelchair. Because the traditional narrative around wheelchair use is that it is a confining thing.
Yep.
But a large reason why we started All Is For All, and we can get into it later, but it's actually design that disables people. So you're talking about how did me navigating social spaces and navigating environments. What was that like from a wheelchair? And at the end of the day, I would have had an equal experience to you if we would have just designed differently. You know, if we would have had ramps instead of stairs, if we would have had openness and curiosity instead of ignorance. You know, so a lot of disability is actually just social structure and design. But I grew up in a household that expected the same from me as it did from my brother. My parents never saw my disability as a barrier. So the great things about that is when I operated in spaces, I didn't see it as a barrier either. Obviously, the difference is sometimes when I was younger, I would encounter people that treated me differently, and it would take me a while and kind of stun me, and I would be like, you know, why is this happening? And I would have to slowly grasp over time that it's actually because I use a wheelchair. And, you know, that's a tough thing for a kid to kind of understand, that they're always going to be thought of as lesser able just because of something that they didn't control about themselves. You know, I didn't choose to. I was born 10 weeks early, and so that's a huge reason why I use a wheelchair. And so obviously that was completely out of my control. So it's hard to always be kind of defined in a sense, at least by strangers, because of something that you can't control about yourself.
Growing up, did you have, I guess, and correct me with wording here, because, you know, this is something we're all learning at the same
totally,
way, right?
Totally.
It's
I mean, I just correct you because you're a mate. So
I mean, but it's something we should all be very conscious of, right?
Yeah,
we want to make sure that these things are being done in the right, not the right way, but how they should be done.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Totally.
Growing up, did you find it was peers, young people, when you were growing up, you know, classmates, friends, that sort of thing, that did they treat you the same, or would they treat you differently compared to how adults would treat you? You know, what was that difference between young people, your peers, and older people? Was there, you know, teachers treated you differently compared to how John in your class treated you, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when I was younger, so just to give a bit of background, I use a manual chair that you push yourself, but it has a motor attached to it so that I can get from place to place. Without that motor, I'm pretty much like would need help to get anywhere, right? So it's a huge benefit to live in this day and age where technology is around. So it's a really interesting tension because you don't want people to treat you differently, but when I was younger and I didn't have this motor on my chair, I did need help. So you don't want people to treat you differently, but you are different because I need John in my class to help me get the coloured pencils, or I need a teacher's help to like do up the buttons on my shirt after PE. So there's a tension there because you want to be like everyone else, but as a young child you actually do need this physical help. So and as I've gotten older, what I've recognized is that it's not so much about wanting to be like everybody else. What it is, it's about people noticing that you're different and being okay with that. It's not about saying, oh, I'm like you, because I'm really not like you. You know, I don't walk, so that makes me different. But it's about people being like, hey, she uses a wheelchair, and that's totally cool, because we know that she's capable of X, Y, and Z, and we know that we need to design better so that she can participate. So as I've gotten older, that's kind of the mindset that I've come into. But when I was younger, people sometimes treated me differently because they didn't, often it was adults that treated me differently because, that was, I think with children, they kind of just accept whatever's around them, But with older people, they could see my disability and knew that it made me different. But like I said, there's a huge tension there because you actually do need help, and that does make you different. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's weird. Sorry, Grayson. Just one more question. It's weird, right? Because it's almost an unknown ignorance. It's not something that I'll touch on something really quickly here. It's not something that I go out of my way to go, oh, she's different, I'm going to treat her differently, I'm going to look at her differently, I'm going to talk to her differently, all these sorts of things. It's an unknown ignorance that you automatically, it's similar to if, I remember back in primary school, I had a kid in my class who was Down syndrome. Very different to all of us as an 8-year-old kid. And it's an unknown ignorance when you're 8 of, yeah, you're a little bit different, but I mean, I'm 8, I don't really know the difference. It's you're another person, we're friends, we hang out, we go and kick a ball around, it's the same. Yeah. And as you get older, I find as you're kind of navigating the world, it's the unknown ignorance of it's different, but I don't understand it. you know, and it's hard to comprehend. Like back, we were chatting just before about how when we first met, you know, we first met at an event.
It was a paint party.
A big paint party.
And people who know me know that I don't, party is not associated with my personality. So
Me neither.
No, obviously not.
But, you know, and I came up to you and I was, do you need any help with anything? And that was me, that unknowing ignorance going, I'm doing the right thing by seeing if she needs help. But, you know, we didn't really kick it off straight away and you were a bit like, fuck off. No, I don't need help. You know?
Where is that line of how much help you can give someone? Because I only just met you today when we're coming here. And
lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. And one of the first interactions we had was going up the elevator, right? And, you know, I pushed the button to do the thing and to get the elevator up. And once we got up to the top, you're like, who goes first? It was like, what?
Yeah, you kind of stopped.
You know, it's like,
wait, yeah.
Do I let you fall?
It's the unknowingness, right?
Yeah.
Of like, how do you navigate those situations without making somebody feel lesser or looking like the idiot?
And it's really interesting. So we did a piece of work a couple of months ago now, and one of the elements of that work that we did, it was with New Zealand's biggest retailer. We did a workshop with them about accessibility, and one of the pieces of work was around what does it look like to ask for help. So if a disabled person comes into a store, what does that interaction look like? And one of our advisors and one of my mentors and one of my best friends, he said to me, he goes, you know, if someone comes up to you who's able-bodied and they ask you for help, you know, they ask you if you need help, and you're a bitch, that's actually on you. Like there's no excuse for being rude. Like that's basically what he said. Because at the end of the day, the best thing and the best way of working is just ask someone if they need help. If they're rude to you, that is actually on them. It's not on you. But then the opposite of that is if I say no, don't ask again. Like I was walking, I say walking, I know I'm not actually walking, but just so you know. I was walking around town a couple of days ago, coming back from a meeting, and there was a guy on the crossing, and he asked me if I needed help crossing the road, and I said no. And then we got up to the next crossing, because there was like 2 or 3, and he asked me again. I said no, and I continued getting really annoyed. Like, so the line is just ask someone if they need help. If they say yes, help them however they instruct you. But if someone says no, just politely leave the situation. Yeah.
How do you navigate that when it's hidden disabilities? You know, because that's a whole nother strain,
it's
right?
A really
yours is visible. Yours is visible.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and there are different. Ways of, you know, different strategies that are in development. In the UK, one strategy for retail is that they ask people who want extra help, who might have invisible disabilities, to wear a sunflower, and when they go shopping, the shopping attendant can see that sunflower and know that that person might need help. I personally don't think it's the greatest of strategies, because I feel like when you group a segment of society with some sort of recognition, it hasn't worked out well, and history showed us that. So there's different strategies around. I feel like often if a person with a disability needs help and they really need it, they will voice it in some way. And whether that's, you know, voicing it verbally or voicing it through facial cues, like you will know if a disabled person that you're interacting with needs help, because often they're not just going to sit there and wait, that they will know from life experience to voice it in some way, whichever way they communicate. So that's what I would say. I would say, you know, for disabilities that are visible, ask. For disabilities that aren't maybe as visible, just pay attention to the people around you. If they're friends with, you know, if you've got a friend, you know, pay attention to however they communicate with you. Often they will just ask in whatever way they can. But don't assume that someone needs help, because, you know, in my case, I've been disabled my whole life. So I'm used to finding my way around obstacles, and I find it frustrating to have my way of working interrupted by people asking if I need help all the time. Yeah,
it's interesting, right? I want to just kind of slowly segment into, we have talked about it many times. Obviously, we're very good friends, and we catch up quite a lot, and we've talked about it, privilege. And that kind of big word, it's a big word that we kind of talk about a lot, and I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts on the word privilege and how that's navigated. Do you consider yourself more or less privileged than another person, or how is that word navigated? I guess. Yeah, I want to get your perspective on that word privilege.
So, I think, like you've said, we've talked about it many times, and I see my disability as a privilege.
Which is interesting, right? Not many people, a lot of people wouldn't.
I mean, a lot of
people in your situation would use it. You know, we talked about a case just before we started this of somebody who uses it, probably doesn't see it as a privilege, but uses it for certain gains, right? Yeah. Whereas you don't use it as a gain, you use it as it's my life.
Well, I do use it as a gain because when I
okay,
I do use it as gain, but so say for example, a good example is with my work. A lot of people ask me to speak, to go to their place and speak. Often they're asking me because of the things that I've done in my work, like I have done some pretty cool things, but also often they're asking me because they want someone who is diverse to be in the room. So I'll use my disability to get in the room sometimes because I want to be at the table. But once I'm at the table, I'm going to tell you everything about me that makes me just as good as you. I also use a wheelchair, so that makes me better. That's not better, but like that makes me cool. I think my disability is a really cool aspect about myself. I think it's given me way more than it's taken. But that also doesn't mean that some days I don't wake up and be like, this is really annoying. Like, a prime example is I texted you the other day because of something that had happened, and someone we work with had not returned a suit jacket for a shoot that we had done because I work in fashion. Anybody else could have, driven to his house, picked the suit jacket up and taken it to the office and like where it needed to be dropped off. I couldn't physically do that. So I needed to ask Matt for help. And luckily for me, because Matt's awesome, he helped me. But it's frustrating to have to do those little things because I know that if my situation was different, I would be able to, just hop on and do that. It's also frustrating. We're going to Sydney in March for a conference. Anybody else could just hop on a flight. I know that I'm going to probably have a not fantastic time on that flight because flying when you're in a wheelchair is very hard. So it's not to say that it's not difficult, but all in all and on the whole, it's given me so much. It's shaped my outlook on the world. It's made me a more compassionate person, a more empathetic person. It's also made me really tough. I have goals and I meet my goals because I want to prove to myself that I can. So yeah, I would say all in all, I'm super privileged to be disabled because of all the things that it's given me. But in terms of privilege, it's very hard to be in a wheelchair. It's not easy, because you're navigating a world that's not designed for you. Whoever designed Auckland back in the day wasn't a disabled 20-year-old woman. They were probably a white man, who was able-bodied. Yeah. And the outcome of that, which is cool because that was the time, but the outcome of that is it's hard to navigate space. And so I'm privileged to be in a wheelchair because of the outlook it's given me, but at times it's something quite hard to navigate the world as a wheelchair user. But I'm also equally as privileged because we live in New Zealand with a great health system for the most part. I had a great education. I'm from a 2-parent household, we're a middle-class home. So all of those things are privileges. And I would say that every person has a level of privilege that they operate in the world in, but equally every person faces hard times. So privilege isn't a constant state, but it is present in everyone's lives. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but that would kind of be my viewpoint. I don't think anyone is entirely privileged, and I don't think anyone is entirely without privilege. And we have to recognize our privilege in order to afford it to other people. So
I agree, and I think privilege it's an interesting concept, right? Because nobody's entitled to privilege. Whether you're born into a multi-million-dollar family or you're born on the street and you're living on the street for your first 10 years, you're not entitled to any specific privilege that anybody else is necessarily. I think privilege is something that's earned and gained over time. You know, you build your repertoire and you build yourself and you build your name and you build your life, and with that comes certain privileges, and with that comes certain hardships, like you said. Where does your mindset come from? Where does this positive, I've never heard anything negative come out of your mouth.
Really? Oh god.
Where does this like real positive outlook on life come? Is that an off strain of?
It's my parents. Yeah. It's my parents, and so my dad, my mum and dad, they obviously had my brother before they had me, and it wasn't known that anything was really going to be wrong. I do this because I know that people can see me wrong with me until I was a year old and diagnosed. So when I was diagnosed, I think, there would have been a teething period for them about kind of understanding that things were going to be different, and to what level disability I would have. I think when I was originally diagnosed, wheelchair use wasn't really on the cards. So, they would have gotten used to things. But the family that I come from is so, I wouldn't say we're positive all the time, but we're super pragmatic about things, and we don't let a lot of things get to us, and we work through a lot of things. And so I think, when my diagnosis kind of came up, my parents took it in their stride, and they kind of built into me this idea that I wasn't going to get anything because I was disabled. I had to kind of build up my skills, like you say. I had to build up a repertoire of skills, and then I would be able to get in the room. They didn't allow me to see my disability as a barrier, and they also didn't allow me to see my disability as something which would solely afford me entrance into the world or entrance into industry. So both of those things have kind of set me in really good stead. If I complained, my parents would listen, but they wouldn't allow it to kind of overshadow the conversation. So it's mostly my parents. And then also just, it's really hard to hate something about yourself if you've had it for so many years. Like the energy that I would spend if I was to spend energy hating my disability that I've had for 21 years, then that would mean I had less energy to contribute to society, less energy to contribute to my studies. So it's also that conversation of where you place your energy. You've only got so much time in your day. So am I really going to spend 2 or 3 hours internally battling myself? Or am I going to spend those 2 or 3 hours churning out a presentation or churning out an assignment or trying to get some investment? Like it's just a conversation about where am I placing my energy, and I don't choose to place my energy into hating something about myself that the rest of society might want me to hate it, but I actually really love it. So
on that, just before, what are some of the biggest challenges your parents had to face?
I don't know. You'd have to talk to them. Like,
being a taxi driver.
Yeah,
that's what your mum always tells me.
My mum's my Uber. Only actually some like
I'm
side note, huh?
I'm that too.
Oh yeah. Are you still not driving?
No. Oh. I know I'm the worst,
You're
laziest
so
person
bad.
ever.
No, I kind of love that. At least I've still got one friend.
Yeah. I mean, I just would like to add that I went with Matt to pick up that because
legend. Thank you.
It's all good. It's all good.
No, I did sincerely really appreciate that. Like that really helped me. Sorry, what was the question?
Your parents, the biggest challenge.
Parents.
Yeah, we went off a bit of a...
My parents, the biggest challenge they would have faced. I don't know. I think for them, maybe it was just they accepted that I was different and that it wouldn't hinder any part of my life. But that didn't necessarily mean that their people around them accepted that.
Is it hard? Is there a lot of family or family friends or anyone that kind of looks differently once that kind of came out maybe?
There's still people in my extended family now who look at my disability differently to how I look at it. And that's purely a generation thing. And it's, again, energy placement. Am I going to spend an hour, 2 hours of this family occasion where I'm meeting up with extended family who I love, trying to get you to understand that I actually am fine without knowing how to run? Like, is that my job to convince you that I'm happy? It's not.
No.
So I would say that it would be a challenge trying to, just because you believe something about your child doesn't mean that everybody around you is going to grasp the same concept. And again, that's the same thing in an education system. Like, I had a great education, but it wasn't without its challenges when you have a disability. So my parents had to navigate a lot of really tricky challenges in my formative years that are basically the result of like social structure and social systems that we operate in. And so I was really lucky that they were able to advocate for me. And then once I was of age, they taught me that I needed to advocate for myself. So those two things probably be the significant challenges for them. But I also don't want to talk for them. Like, I don't know what the experience of having a disabled child is like. There is this poem, and there's mixed reviews about the poem, but the poem is basically about this woman who she plans to go on a trip to Italy, and she reads all the books, and she, has an itinerary, and she has this big plan, and she hops on the plane, and the plane takes her to Switzerland or some other European country, maybe not Switzerland. And so, now she's in Switzerland. She's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I've got no plans for Switzerland. And the poem is a metaphor about having a disabled child, because nobody plans to have a child who's different. So it's kind of like planning to go to Italy and then ending up in Switzerland. Switzerland's a great place to holiday. Lots of awesome things to do there. I've never been to Switzerland, but I assume. So it's as equally a good place, but it's different and you have to get used to it. So that's the same for any parent of a child who's different.
Yeah. I think something I really admire about you, I've known you for a while, is you have a very, whether this is true or not, I don't know, you let me know, but you come across as if you know yourself very well. You know who you are, what your values are, and who you are as a person. And you go, I know who I am. I don't need to justify that to anybody else, because this is me and this is the world I want to see and the happiness I'm going to create. We talked a bit about this with Zach last week, was, how important is it for young people to find who they are and really explore the navigations of life and discover like who they are and what they stand for and what they really believe in. How important was that for you, and how important is that for young people kind of navigating life?
I think it's hugely important. And I think a lot of, when I was growing up, obviously, like before I found, when we met, it was because I was writing. Before I found writing and actually like technology, like using the computer, I didn't do a lot as a kid. I didn't play sport. I tried to play a musical instrument and failed because I've got terrible hand-eye coordination and no discipline. So every time I was asked to practice the violin, I obviously didn't. And so before I found writing, before I found, the computer and eventually this business that I run, I didn't have a lot. So I knew what I wanted to offer, and I kind of knew that I was proud of my disability and things like that. But I had nowhere to channel it or nowhere to actually make it happen. So I think it was hugely important for me to find an outlet. So that's kind of a really interesting kind of add-on to what you were talking about with Zach, because it's also like, you need to figure out who you are, you need to figure out where you fit in the world, but we need to find like accessible outlets for everyone, because there might be a disabled person in the world who really loves sport, whatever sport that is. So, what is that outlet for them if they can't take part in traditional sport? Are we uplifting parasports enough? So it's not just knowing who you are, but it's actually having a society that supports a diverse amount of outlets so that young people can feel like they have a place in what they want to do and who they want to be. Because it can often feel like, yes, I might want to be in business, but where are my role models? Who are the disabled business leaders? I can't think of very many. I can think of a couple, but they're fully outweighed by people in business who don't look like me and don't navigate the world that I do. So when you want something and you know who you are, but there's no role models, it's hard.
Yeah, on that, I was watching an episode the other day of one of these Switch TV podcasts around diversity and those sorts of things, and I asked a question and started a conversation around tokenism and navigating that space. Diversity and representation is important
Yeah,
across all aspects.
And diversity, is quite a trigger word now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
I just want to touch on that.
saying.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, diversity and kind of representation is probably the better word. Representation is important.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably going to upset a lot of people, but I got quite frustrated when the feminist movement got large. You know, I'm all for the feminist movement. I'm all for women representation, all that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I got frustrated was I started to see a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses, a lot of people I knew jump on that, and it was almost tokenism. It was, we've now got a female on our board for the fact of needing a female on the board.
Yeah. So
and sorry, I'll just finish there.
No.
100% women need to be women, people with disabilities, African Americans, all these different sorts of diversities around the world need to be included, and they need their voice at the table. But you know, from your point of view, this might be quite interesting. Is at what point does it become tokenism? You know, and it's, we're going to get somebody, like we talked about a little bit before. You know, you got offered an opportunity on a board, or you get speaking engagements. At what point is it, we're just inviting Grace because she's in a wheelchair and we need somebody to represent that voice? You know, and it's making it really authentic and going, we've got this person here because they bring these assets to the table,
and
they happen to be a woman.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting tension. So it's really, it's a super interesting conversation. There's a quote by Helen Clark, and I'm going to misquote it. So sorry, Ellen, if you're listening. Highly doubt it.
Maybe.
But I'd love that. But the quote is basically that if women want to be active participants, if women want to be active developers of change, they need to be at the table and designing the plans, designing the concepts, figuring out the way forward. Like, the only way for us to be actively creating change that is a better world for women to live in is by them designing the future. If they're not, they're always just going to be passive benefactors of change, and the world that they live in. And so my takeaway from that quote, which I just grossly misquoted, was if we want change and a better world for people, they need to be designing the change. And that's why All Is For All, the business, begun. But it's a really interesting tension, because you're right. I want to be involved in projects because of my merit. But then again, you can't be what you can't see. So if there's no disabled person on the board, how are we ever going to make it so that meaningfully more people who are diverse can be on boards?
And that's key word, right? Meaningfully and authentically.
Yes. But we have to start somewhere. It's kind of like, some companies, they have the gender equity quota. So it's like a certain percentage of their leadership team has to be female. And I'm like you. I said to someone, why do you have that? That's just, why can't women just apply and be accepted? Why does there need to be a quota? And they said to me, similarly as I just said, that if there's no quota, they can't actually see the change and make sure that it's implemented. So I think, having a disabled person on a board because they're disabled and they're checking that box is at least a start. And we need the start. But then the problem is, and it's kind of like, it can be compared to fashion. Ashley Graham's podcast. Ashley Graham is a plus size model, and she just did a podcast, and she was saying that the problem is that, when they cast someone who is a woman of colour or someone who is disabled, they then tick that box, and no other person of colour is on the shoot. No other disabled person is on the shoot.
And that's that issue of tokenism they bring up, right?
Yeah, that's the problem. The problem is that we think it's a box to tick. It's not a box to tick. It's actually something to make a part of your business in a meaningful way again. But I would say that at least, having one person is better than having none. So it's a really interesting tension. Another example, when we had our models in Fashion Week, we had 6 disabled models cast in Fashion Week for the first time. And someone said to me if I was worried about tokenism, because, there's only one disabled person on the runway, because, there were 6 models cast and they walked about 11 or 12 times. But, there's only 1 or 2 disabled models on the runway, and, there might be 30 models in a show. And so someone asked me if I was worried about tokenism, and I said, I said that all they had to do was look at All Is For All and look at where those models come from and look at what they stand for. If you're worried about tokenism, like all you have to do is look at our brand and look at everything that we stand for and why those models are there, and that will tell you that it's not tokenistic.
And that's it, right? And that's I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to a very good friend of mine, Alexia, Hubertadu, right, from Girl Boss. Same thing. She's take a look at the organisation she's built and what she's doing, and then all the work she does going forward in all these different organisations. Isn't that a lot of these organisations? It's not tokenism now, because it's a movement she's created, and it's around that same premise. You can't be what you can't see. For me, it's very easy. There's a lot of old white males running businesses. So for me, I can see me doing that, But like you said, it's a bit harder. There's not many females in wheelchairs running large fashion businesses. No. So you're going, maybe I can't do this.
Yeah.
But you're very lucky that, you had that privilege growing up that you're going, I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so interesting because it's really hard internally to always be constantly thinking to yourself like, oh, I've only got that opportunity because I'm disabled. That's a really hard. And when I was younger, I was actually in the senior leadership team of my high school, which actually means nothing, but at the time it was like super cool. I think you were head boy, weren't you?
Yeah, same thing. You feel like you're real cool, but it means nothing.
Yeah. No, it was cool back in the day.
Definitely.
Yeah. Anyway, and I got the head of academic at the school. That was my title. And I remember people in my year level, and it got back to me saying, oh, Grace got that because she used a wheelchair. And it really hurt at the time because actually when people invite me into spaces now, like I said to you before, I've got a great CV. I've got an awesome, flourishing business. It's doing super well. So I feel like people invite me to talk about all that stuff, and my disability is a part of all those things. So I obviously talk about it. But back in the day, when people would say things like that to me, it was really harmful, and it almost stopped me from wanting to try and do things because I didn't want people to say, oh, she's just got that because she's disabled. So I think people need to be really careful with, as with anything, kind with your words, careful with your words. Because it could have easily stopped me, that mindset could have easily stopped me from wanting to advance.
Were there any situations where what people said to you stopped you? Or has every time someone said something negative kept you as a driver to keep going?
Look, I'm sure there were. There's probably been times where, for a couple of days, I've been knocked out and I've been like, nah, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm trying to think of a specific example. I think the thing for me is that at the end of the day, going back to knowing yourself, I know now, after however many years, I know now that my disability is a huge part of my identity, but also I've got a lot of things to offer. And I know now that when people say that to me, it's probably just because they're insecure and they're not happy with their lives, and they're trying to belittle my achievements and belittle me by saying, oh, she's just disabled and that's why she's there. So knowing who I am is a huge part of why I'm still able, why I'm able to keep tackling those things, because I know that I've got way more to offer. But back in the day in high school, when people used to say shit like that, it was like, it hurt, and it put a damper on what should have been quite exciting,
How do we as a society become more kind?
I don't know. What you said before about I keep touching my nose. I'm sorry, but I'm just having this view of me having stuff on my face and then everyone's seeing it. What you said before about me always being positive is really interesting, because I would say that I'm quite a critical person. I'm quite critical of the things that I do. I'm
very critical of yourself, but not of others.
Yeah.
Which is a nice balance.
Yeah, and because I want positive outcomes for my community, not just for me. So I think the way that we become more kind is just by doing our best to place ourselves in the shoes of the person. If those students who said, oh, she's just disabled and that's why she got it, if they were in my shoes, how would they feel? But then again, I think we also become kind by not being yes men, but by being discerning and by thinking about, hey, is this the best thing for our community. Like, should we be investing in another narrative? Should we be investing more in young people instead of in this? Should we be doing X instead of Y? I feel like there's a tendency a lot of the time for other people, whether it be our peers or whoever, to just be yes men and just go along with what you're doing, when really we benefit from questioning, we benefit from discussion. I work with someone, the same person, my mentor, that his name is Red, and he's a little bit older than me, and we disagree on quite a lot of things. We have similar mindsets, similar ways of working, but sometimes we disagree, and often it's the discussion that results in a better outcome. So I feel like we become kinder by actually just not saying yes all the time, by thinking and by...
It's hard though, right? Because somebody you very, there's been multiple situations I've been in where somebody you respect a lot, somebody you look up to a lot says something and you go, that must be right. Yeah. Or as a young person going...
Because you don't want to think it's wrong.
Exactly. As a young person going into the workforce, somebody says, oh, should we do this? Or what about this? And you, for the first year of my experience in the workforce, it was yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. And you're right. After a while, it's something you learn, and you're like, maybe it's actually healthy to say no sometimes and go, let's question the status quo, which I think you're right is important for us to grow as a society to challenge that status quo and go, is what we're doing the right thing?
Yeah, because kindness, I feel like there's a tendency, kindness doesn't always have to be soft. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes people think that by being... sometimes kindness is consoling people and agreeing with people, and sometimes that's kind. Other times, kindness is actually being constructive, or kindness is actually sitting down and having a conversation. Or sometimes kindness is someone calling you out and saying, hey, Grace, I didn't like what you said on that podcast. This has actually happened to me, not on this podcast, on a different one. Someone called me up after I did one, and they were like, you said something that wasn't correct, and this is why.
I think that's the best kind of kindness.
Yeah.
Some of my best friends and some of the people I admire the most is that kind of criticism, Call you up at 11 p.m. at night and go, why are you still in the office? Why are you still working?
And I used to do that to you.
Exactly.
I used to say, and you never listened to me.
But it's not that thing of, like, oh, don't do that, or we don't want you to do that, or
it's
agree with me.
It's
going, we both know this isn't the right thing. Mm-hmm. We both know that what you're doing isn't the best thing for you or for people around you, so why are you doing it? And that in its own way is kindness, right? I do it to Grace and I do it to each other all the time.
For sure.
Should what we're doing now, or should what we're choosing to do, should we actually do that? Is that the right thing for us or for society?
Yeah, and I think it's especially important for me, maybe in a different way, because what I do at All Is For All, which I will get into a bit later, but basically, I want it to be something that other people with disabilities are proud of. So it's doubly important, if not triply important, that I'm called out when I say or do the wrong thing, because if it's just me being advanced, if it's just my opinion, and if it's just my development, then it's not going to be sustainable for the community that I belong to. So yeah, kindness, I would say, is 98% of the time it's people being honest with you in a constructive way and saying, hey, you probably shouldn't have said this, but I understand your point, but you could have phrased that in a different way.
Which I'm sure we're going to get lots of those.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about All Is For All. We've got a few minutes, so tell me a little bit more about your work there.
Really? This has gone so fast.
Tell me what the
premise.
I'm trying to think of the right word.
Yeah, so the premise is, I'm just going to interrupt you, sorry. The premise is basically, the mission statement is to enable disabled people to be drivers of development for the modern world, kind of based off that Helen Clark quote, in the sense that if we want there to be change and we want to be active change makers, then we need to be at the table. So the All Is For All brand basically has 4 pillars. So it works in innovation, conversation, connection and consultants. Connection and representation. I always forget one. So, what that looks like is working with brands on their UX, helping to, a whole range of businesses to understand accessibility and apply it meaningfully to their business. It also looks like me acting as a manager for disabled talent, getting them in Fashion Week, getting them in commercial jobs. It also looks like me sitting down and doing things like this, or having conversations with people. We do a lot of work in academia, so things like helping with accessibility in papers for universities, basically a whole range of different work. People can have a look at our stuff online. We also developed a digital human with Unique, which reads garment descriptions. We started in fashion because that's kind of the nucleus of cultural relevance, and it helps people to kind of express themselves. But we swiftly widened outside of fashion after we were successful in that way. Yeah. So that's kind of what we do. I don't know if that explains it.
No, but yeah, I mean, I know a little bit about it. I've been following it for a while.
Yeah.
Amazing organisation, and the work you guys are doing around representation, I think, is the key one there that I see. And being a voice for people who sometimes probably feel like their voice isn't heard, or they don't have a voice.
How long do we have?
We've got some time if you want to go on a tangent.
Because I just wanted to say, it's really
How long
interesting.
have we been live for?
A little while.
Go a little while?
Yeah.
I just want to say, it's really interesting that you say that. Have you seen the quote that's like, there's no such thing as the voice for the voiceless. There's only the intentionally silenced or the preferably unheard?
I haven't.
I think I have heard of it.
Yeah.
Who said it?
I have no idea. But a lot of people say to me when I do speeches that, we're giving people a voice. But disabled people have always had a voice. They've always been important. They've always had power. But they've just existed in a space that has consistently told them that they didn't. So just wanted to make that point.
I mean, that's a really good point, because I just want to touch on that. That goes for everybody, right?
Totally.
Everybody has a voice.
Yeah,
and I actually really like, I've never heard that, but I really like that. It's, what was it? Preferably unheard or intentionally silent.
Yeah, so there's no such thing as a voice. There's no such thing as the voiceless. There's only the intentionally silenced or the preferably unheard.
I like that, right? Yeah. Because there is a lot of people around New Zealand and the world, and many people that will probably listen to this that probably feel like they don't have a voice or their voice isn't heard. And I really like that quote, because I think you're right. I think everybody does have a voice. And everybody's voice has an equal right to be heard.
Yeah, and it's just knowing how to use it. Like,
how do you use it? Grace and I are very lucky we've got this platform, so we can express our beliefs and our voice, and we've got multiple other platforms where we can do that. Mm-hmm. How do people that feel like maybe they don't have their voice, or they've got something they want to share with the world, but they don't know how to share that? How do you navigate that?
So it's really interesting. I think, you talked a little bit last week with Zach about, who's way cooler than me, by the way, with Zach about social media, and, had a brief discussion about how it was kind of impacting mental health and those things. But the flip side, of course, is that it is for the most part, accessible platform for the majority of society to share their views. And so it's something that a part of All Is For All is a modelling agency that represents, I think we've got maybe like 15 to 20 people on our books at the moment. And they all have disabilities that are different. And also the girl in our shirt's one of our models. So they all use social media, and gradually they're all gaining traction as content creators. I won't say influencers, because that's a trigger word for people. Content creators. And so they're really, traditionally, you don't see disabled people as speakers or as leaders or in fashion or all of those things. And so social media is really the first step in those girls getting out there, girls and boys getting out there to be able to share their voice on a larger platform. So I would say that social media, for all its pitfalls, is actually a really powerful tool, because it is mostly accessible and it enables people to share their views. I would also say another thing that people could do, journaling might be a really cool thing for people to do, because it just allows you to get your own thoughts on paper, and then when you're in a better position, whatever position that may be, you can share those thoughts with other people, whether that be just through a conversation with a friend. That processing is really important.
I think what you said there is I find really important. And when I, growing up before, I was very privileged going through schooling. I was always in a great position to share my thoughts and my views and things. And but I found the strongest and most impactful way that I've ever been able to share my voice and who I am is through one-on-one conversations with friends. Just people, anybody. You know, it
and
might
we're
be.
quite lucky because we operate in a circle.
We are.
Yeah, we're quite lucky because we operate in it. Like, because I have a friend. Well, so yeah, he's kind of my friend. I know, I know this person who we are friends, I guess, and he's a little bit older and was looking for a foot into VC, to work in venture capital. And so I connected him with someone that I knew, and then they connected him with someone that they knew, and he got a place at a VC firm in Auckland. And I could really easily do that thing because of our circle, because of who we're connected with. But he was quite a bit older, and I was like, why can't, internally I thought, it's really interesting. Why can't this person just do it for themselves? But actually, a lot of people don't have that footing that you and I have so early. That ability to have conversations with whoever we want, really.
But
yeah.
Sorry, just I want to take a step back from that because I think going back to expressing voice is, me having a conversation with Grayson at the dinner table is still expressing my voice.
Yeah, totally.
We talk about issues, we disagree all the time, and we'll argue and we'll talk about things. Still expressing my voice. Having a conversation with my mum, my brother, it's an expression of voice, right? It's an opportunity as long as you're comfortable in that situation. It's an opportunity for you to share your views and get constructive kindness, like we talked about, where people can challenge your views, and you can talk about these things. And it's like you said, is you never know who you're talking to. You might say something, they go, "I know the perfect person you need to talk to."
Yes.
And then you meet someone, you have a conversation, they go, "I know who you need to meet." And next thing you know, you've got that dream job because you've shared your voice and your opinion with as many people as you possibly can to go,
totally,
this is what I believe in, and I want to meet people like-minded to me, but also people that can challenge me, and those connections start to happen from those conversations.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting because for a lot of people, like that friend that I was talking about, they just haven't had the opportunity to talk to the right people.
But that's what I'm saying is everybody is the right person.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there are a lot of people that maybe don't have the connections that we have.
I know, I understand where you're coming from, but and I recognise that privilege wholeheartedly.
Totally.
But
yeah.
Sorry, getting quite heated towards the end of this conversation.
No.
I wholeheartedly believe that conversations with anybody will be impactful, right?
Yeah, but it might be impactful by just like it might not necessarily be impactful in the sense that it gives you an outcome that you want. It might just be having a conversation.
But they might
really
have a conversation with, let's say they had a conversation with Grayson, and they started talking, and by the end of that person goes, "Actually, VC is not what I want to do anymore." Yeah, because I realized I've got a passion somewhere else, and you know somebody there, and I'm gonna, that's what I'm saying. Is those, I conversation with the producers here before, and you learn some things that you are like, I have no idea about that, and now I'm going to go learn that, and they might connect me to somebody in a certain area that I want to learn more about. And it's a conversation. I have had conversation with a random person, a homeless person on the street the other day.
Yes.
They can't connect me to anybody, but they can enlighten me on, or maybe they can,
but
they can enlighten me on certain areas.
And everybody's got something to offer. So everyone's got something to offer you, in the sense that you have, I think everyone has an opportunity. Everyone's got something to teach you, and offer's probably the wrong word, but everyone's got something to teach you. So I think opening yourself up to having conversations is a way of really figuring out, not also just sharing your voice, but also figuring out what your voice is.
Yep.
Because like you said, that person, after they had a conversation with me, might have been like, "Oh, I don't want to work in VC," but, they had a fantastic time working in where they were working, and now they know that they want that to be their career. So I can look back really proudly and be like, hey, I didn't do much. All I did was knock them in the right direction to talk to someone I knew, but that might have really helped that person, and that's really cool. So everybody, has something to teach you in the sense that you can learn from all the conversations that you have. But also I would say social media is a cool place because you can, movements like I Weigh are a good example. There's so many voices out there that want to share, change-making situations. We know so many people that are doing great stuff, and a lot of that stuff started on social. So I'd say the two, yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, I think we probably might have to start to wrap it up here. We've been live for a while.
No worries.
We're going to end on how we're going to end every podcast. We did it with Zach.
The 3-3-3. I
The
watched
you
it.
did. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
The 3-3-3. So 3 successes this week that you've had, or last week since it's Monday. 3 successes, 3 failures. Hold yourself accountable to those, and then the 3 big goals for this week.
Okay, I'll start with the failures because they come to mind faster. So we were up for a grant for this thing called Expo 2020 that's happening in Dubai. It's like a big deal. We didn't get it. That's fine. There's lots of sand in Dubai, so probably got it stuck. The other 2 things are failures. I did some presentations with spelling mistakes in them, but luckily some people I work with caught them, but that's still a mistake. Still can't grasp spelling. So that's another. And third one, what's my third one? I think maybe I was a little bit hard on myself this week after the Dubai thing, and I could probably have been a bit nicer. But then again, if you're not hard on yourself, like, do you really get anywhere? Like, it's an interesting, 3 successes this last week. We had a really good meeting about a piece of work that we're going to embark on, which I'm very excited about, and that is focused around representation of disabled people. Second success, our merch kits that we are doing, our PR kits that we are doing, that I'm not going to say too much about because they'll be on social, but they're like I'm really proud of how we're able to kind of unify our community and those things. And third success, we, like I said, mentioned a few times, have this new person working with us called Red. He's like, again, I think everyone's cooler than me, but he's like actually cooler than me. And he's going to offer so much to what we do. So I would say that he's the third success. And then what's the other 3?
3 big goals for next week.
3 big goals. On Tuesday, we've got a couple of presentations we've got to get away. And the PR kits would be a big goal. So getting those out to people and making sure that, other people in our community are uplifted. Third goal, one of our models is up for a really cool opportunity. So I want to make sure that gets secured for her by the end of next week. And then she can say that she's got that under her belt. And then those kinds of opportunities are what makes sure that our young people see themselves represented.
That's awesome.
So those are the 3. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Awesome.
Well, for everybody who watches this and has a listen, how can they get a hold of you if they want to talk to you? Email, text, phone, social, LinkedIn, I don't know.
One. No. Just look at allisforall.com if you want to get involved. Anything that we can do. Our models' Instagrams will all be on All Is For All, so you can see them all there. They're, again, way cooler than me, so you should follow them. My actual Instagram account is private, so you can't follow me there, but you could follow me on LinkedIn if you really wanted to. One of those nerds that uses LinkedIn. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening, and we'll be back next week, 2:30 Monday next week, with another guest yet to be revealed.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, Grace. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
Cool.
Enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
We'll see you next week. Peace.